Kat sat frozen in the dimly lit study of Fairmont Crest, the DNA results clutched in her trembling hands as the fluorescent light above flickered like a harbinger of doom, her heart pounding as if the walls themselves were echoing the cruel truth she was only beginning to comprehend. And in that instant, the years of suspicion, whispers, and uneasy alliances in the Dupree and Fairmont families cascaded through her mind in a blur, each memory now tinged with betrayal, lies, and questions that demanded answers she wasn't sure she was ready to face, because the results weren't just numbers on a piece of paper. They were a verdict, a revelation that shattered the foundation of her identity, forcing her to confront the painful possibility that everything she thought she knew about her bloodline, about who she was, about the family that had raised her, was not only incomplete, but perhaps deliberately obscured by those who should have protected her. And as she struggled to breathe, the room seemed to close in around her, the shadows of the past merging with the present as images of her parents, of her closest friends, of allies she had trusted, and even the people she had despised, all seemed to swirl in a chaotic storm of memory and doubt, leaving her to wonder which connections were real, which were fabricated, and which were somewhere horrifyingly in between. And in that suffocating swirl, the face of Danny appeared in her mind, her voice echoing faintly from earlier conversations in the hallway, filled with the warmth of sisterly affection, yet unknowingly harboring secrets that now seemed monstrous in their implications, because the truth wasn't just about Kat. It was about the Dupree legacy, the hidden fractures in Fairmont Crest's history, the hidden rivalries that had festered for generations, and the insidious manipulations orchestrated by people whose smiles concealed motives more sinister than Kat could have imagined. And as she sank into the plush velvet armchair, clutching the envelope as if it were a lifeline, her thoughts turned to the implications of these genetic revelations, the cancer gene she now carried, the chance that it had been passed down through generations, quietly, insidiously, shaping destinies and creating alliances and betrayals that had seemed inexplicable before but now made a terrifying kind of sense, and the cruel irony that she, who had always sought control, always sought the truth, was now forced to confront the uncontrollable, the unknowable, the unchangeable. And in the shadows outside the study, footsteps echoed softly, the faint rustle of silk and leather betraying the presence of someone watching, someone waiting for her reaction, and the possibilities raced through her mind, from Bill's well-intentioned but often misguided attempts to protect her, to Hayley's seductive cunning that had left a trail of heartbreak and ruin, to Leslie's relentless pursuit of justice and vengeance, and each thought brought with it a fresh wave of anxiety, because the DNA results weren't just a revelation. They were a spark that could ignite every secret, every hidden resentment, every suppressed scandal in Beyond the Gates. And as Kat's hands shook and tears blurred her vision, she realized that the cruel truth about bloodlines was not just the scientific fact revealed in the lab report, but the emotional, psychological, and social fallout that would ripple through Fairmont Crest like a shockwave, exposing the fragility of trust, the treachery hidden behind smiles, and the inevitability of confrontation. And she thought of Carlton, whose duplicity had already caused upheaval, whose shadowy alliances and secret marriages had entangled the lives of those she cared about, and of Ted, who now faced the unenviable task of discerning loyalty in a house built on deception. And Kat's mind raced to the present moment, to the evenings she had spent with Chelsea and Madison, laughing over trivialities that now seemed cruelly naive, because beneath the laughter had always been the undercurrent of danger, a reminder that in Beyond the Gates, no one was ever truly safe, and every revelation could upend everything. And as she stared at the paper, she imagined Dante's calm, calculating presence, the way he seemed to always know more than he revealed, and the way his few words could twist the course of an entire household. And she felt the weight of history pressing down upon her, the legacy of secrets, betrayals, and unspoken alliances stretching back decades. And she understood that this DNA revelation was not merely a personal tragedy, it was a catalyst, a turning point in the ongoing saga, a piece in the grand puzzle of power, love, deceit, and survival. And she could feel the gears of fate grinding inexorably forward, drawing her into decisions she might not be ready to make, alliances she might not want to form, and confrontations she could not avoid. And yet, even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a spark of determination ignited within Kat, because while the truth was cruel, knowledge was power, and she knew that to survive, to navigate the treacherous waters of Fairmont Crest and beyond, she would have to face the most difficult question of all: who could she trust when bloodlines themselves had betrayed her? And in that realization, she steeled herself. The paper crumpled in her fist, and though tears still threatened to fall, her mind sharpened, her senses heightened, because in Beyond the Gates, revelation was the first step toward action. And as the door creaked open and the footsteps drew near, Kat rose, her shadows stretching long and fierce across the study, ready to confront the cruel truths, the tangled webs of family, the dark undercurrents of power, and the uncertain future. And in that moment, the audience watching at home, gripped by every twist, every secret, every betrayal, understood that Kat's journey was no longer just about discovery. It was about survival, resilience, and the indomitable will to face the truth, no matter how harrowing. Because in the world of Beyond the Gates, the past is never buried, the present is never safe, and the future is a battle written in bloodlines, secrets, and the choices of those brave or foolish enough to confront them. Kat's mind raced even as her body moved on autopilot. Each step toward the study door waited with dread, because she knew that beyond that threshold waited not just a person, but the culmination of years of hidden truths, whispered rumors, and carefully constructed facades. And as her fingers brushed the brass doorknob, a memory hit her like a punch. The night she had confronted Hayley over her manipulations, the veiled threats that had seemed small at the time now looming as part of a pattern she could barely untangle. And Kat realized with a sickening clarity that every smile, every gesture of kindness, every seemingly innocent comment had been a thread in a web spun long before she was old enough to understand. And as she pushed open the door, the dim hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the portraits of Fairmont ancestors on the walls staring down at her with expressions frozen in time, as if judging her for daring to uncover the truths they had carried in silence. And there, at the far end, stood Chelsea, her usual confident posture faltering for the first time, eyes wide, betraying fear that mirrored Kat's own. And behind Chelsea, Madison lingered, lips pressed into a thin line, hands clasped tightly as if holding herself together in the face of a storm she could not control. And in that charged silence, Kat felt the weight of her DNA results pressing on her from all sides, the knowledge that she carried not only the literal legacy of her family's bloodline, but the symbolic burden of everything it represented: secrets, rivalries, betrayals, and choices made long before she could influence them. And as the seconds stretched, Dani appeared, almost silently, her presence both comforting and terrifying, because Dani had always been the sister she could rely on, yet now every interaction was shaded with the possibility of deception. The chance that even her most trusted confidant had unknowingly become part of a system designed to keep Kat in the dark. And as Kat's eyes darted between them, she realized the cruel irony of her predicament. Knowledge that should have been liberating felt like a chain, each revelation binding her tighter to a legacy of manipulation she had never asked for. And in that instant, she saw Bill appear from the shadows, calm yet tense, the man who had always positioned himself as protector now seeming almost like a judge, his eyes scanning her face, as if measuring not only her reaction but her worthiness to bear this truth. And Kat understood that in Beyond the Gates, no act, no revelation, no confrontation was ever isolated, because the ripple effects of a single secret could tear apart alliances, friendships, and even the fragile construct of love that existed in this house. And as Dante's voice echoed softly from somewhere above, a ghost of menace lurking in the familiar cadence, Kat felt the subtle shift in power, the sense that this revelation, the DNA, the hidden genes, the implications for survival and legacy, was not just personal, but a trigger for moves, countermoves, and strategies she could not yet predict. And in her mind, the scenes replayed: Ted discovering Carlton's secret marriage, Leslie realizing Marcel was not an ally but a trap, the slow unraveling of Hayley's schemes, Chelsea's suspicions about Bill, and even the quiet, devastating moment when Anita and Nicole learned they were not biologically related, each plotline intertwining with her own sudden revelation, creating a tapestry of chaos that threatened to consume them all. And in that tension-filled moment, Kat's body reacted before her mind could catch up. She stepped forward, hands trembling, voice barely a whisper, demanding answers that might not exist, yet knowing that the answers, when they came, would change everything. Because in Beyond the Gates, a truth revealed was never just a fact. It was a weapon, a threat, and a lifeline all at once. And as Chelsea, Madison, and Danny exchanged wary glances, the room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation, and then a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible click from the staircase, made every head turn, and Kat felt a chill, the kind that travels down the spine when danger is immediate, intimate, and inevitable. And as Dante stepped into view, the candlelight flickering across his face, the calm, almost cruel smile he wore sent a shiver through her, because she knew that his presence here now was no coincidence, that he had orchestrated at least part of this revelation, that every move he had made was calculated to provoke, manipulate, and expose. And Kat felt both fear and clarity, because in that moment, she understood that survival in Fairmont Crest meant more than uncovering the truth. It meant using it, weaponizing it, bending the chaotic currents of power in a house defined by secrecy to her own will. And yet, even as determination flared within her, doubt crept in, because how could she navigate a landscape where every ally might secretly be an enemy, where love and loyalty were conditional, and where the bonds of blood could not be trusted? And as she met Dante's gaze, Kat realized that she had a choice: to cower in the face of revelation, to let the cruelty of her inherited bloodline dictate her fate, or to rise, armed with knowledge, cunning, and courage, to challenge the manipulations that had haunted Fairmont Crest for generations. And in that decision, there was both terror and exhilaration, because while the path ahead was fraught with danger, betrayal, and heartbreak, it was also the path of agency, of self-definition, and of the possibility that she could rewrite the legacy she had been born into. And as the scene closed on Kat standing tall, DNA report in hand, shadows playing across the faces of her friends, enemies, and family alike, the audience at home held their breath, knowing that this was only the beginning of a chain of events that would ripple through Beyond the Gates, altering every relationship, every alliance, every hidden agenda. And that Kat's journey, defined by revelation, resilience, and the unforgiving demands of family and power, had only just begun. And in that suspense-filled moment, the cruel truth about bloodlines had revealed itself not just to Kat, but to all who watched, a chilling reminder that in Beyond the Gates, the past is never dead, secrets are never safe, and the future belongs only to those brave or reckless enough to seize it. Kat's thoughts collided with each other in a chaotic storm as the room seemed to contract around her, every shadow whispering secrets she had never asked to know, every flicker of candlelight revealing more than just the ornate portraits and ancestral tapestries on the walls. Because now, with the DNA results burning like a brand in her hand, she had to navigate not only her own identity crisis, but the intricate lattice of manipulation that had defined Fairmont Crest for generations. And as she glanced at Chelsea, whose perfectly composed facade was cracking at the edges, Kat realized that the years of subtle competitiveness, jealousy, and silent judgment had all been building toward this precise moment, the moment when hidden truths collided with personal loyalties. And as Madison shifted uneasily, biting her lip, Kat understood that some alliances were as fragile as glass, ready to shatter under the weight of revelation. And Danny's quiet presence, normally a balm, now carried an edge, because every comforting word and supportive gesture might have been informed by secrets she herself had not fully understood until now. And as she thought of Bill, standing just outside the circle like a sentinel of justice or perhaps judgment, Kat felt both reassurance and fear, because his motives were rarely simple, and while he had always positioned himself as protector, his understanding of family, legacy, and power could easily tip into obsession, and the realization hit Kat that even people she loved could be instruments of manipulation, whether they knew it or not. And in that dizzying swirl of uncertainty, the staircase creaked again, and Dante's calm, deliberate steps sounded like a drumbeat in her chest, a reminder that power in Beyond the Gates was measured in subtlety, strategy, and timing, and that he, more than anyone, understood how to turn knowledge into leverage. And as he reached the landing and looked down, the candlelight casting angular shadows across his sharp features, Kat felt the cold, electric certainty that the revelations of her bloodline, the hidden medical risks, and the legacy of deceit were not isolated incidents but part of a grand, decades-long pattern, a meticulously woven story of ambition, betrayal, and survival. And suddenly, every smile she had ever trusted, every alliance she had assumed, every secret she had laughed off as harmless or irrelevant, took on a new, sinister significance, and the cruel, almost cinematic irony was unbearable. Her very DNA, the essence of her being, was now the epicenter of a storm that could reshape every relationship in Fairmont Crest, destabilize loyalties, and force confrontations that had been lurking beneath the surface for years. And as the silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint ticking of an antique clock and the distant howl of wind against the mansion's stone walls, Kat's mind raced, considering not only her own options but the broader implications for everyone. Chelsea's ambitions, Madison's secrets, Danny's loyalties, Bill's protective instincts, Hayley's cunning schemes that had already left devastation in their wake, Leslie's relentless drive for justice or vengeance, and the ever-present specter of Marcel, whose duplicity had been a shock to those who believed in him, and even Ted and Carlton, whose own tangled histories, hidden marriages, and betrayals now seemed inextricably linked to the very revelation that had upended Kat's life. And she realized with a chilling clarity that survival in this house required more than courage. It demanded strategy, intuition, and the ability to act decisively in a game where every move could trigger catastrophic consequences. And as she clenched the DNA envelope like a lifeline, Kat made the first of many decisions. She would no longer be a passive recipient of the past, a victim of secrets, or a pawn in someone else's design, but an active participant, wielding her newfound knowledge as both shield and weapon, because in Beyond the Gates, the difference between survival and disaster was often measured in who understood the truths no one else dared acknowledge. And as Dante's gaze met hers, Kat felt the flicker of recognition, the unspoken acknowledgement that the playing field had shifted irrevocably, and she understood that her choices now carried the weight of generations, the power to rewrite narratives that had been fixed in silence for decades. And yet, even as determination surged, fear remained, because the path forward was treacherous, riddled with emotional landmines, potential betrayals, and the unrelenting pressure of a house where everyone was both observer and participant. And Kat's next moves would ripple outward, challenging loyalties, igniting old rivalries, and testing the very bonds of friendship, love, and family. And as she inhaled deeply, her mind darting to every possible scenario, from confrontations with Hayley and Carlton to secret alliances with Leslie and Bill, from carefully measured revelations to quiet observation of those whose true intentions remained hidden, and even to the shadows themselves, which in Fairmont Crest seemed almost alive, waiting to ensnare the unwary. Kat realized that she was standing at the epicenter of a perfect storm, one where every secret, every truth, every lie would collide with devastating consequences. And in that suspended moment, she made a silent vow. No matter the cost, no matter the heartbreak, betrayal, or danger, she would navigate this labyrinth of deceit and bloodlines with clarity, courage, and cunning, because in Beyond the Gates, the only way to survive was to confront the cruel truths head-on, to master them, and to use them as both shield and sword. And as the wind howled outside and the candlelight flickered across faces filled with hope, fear, and uncertainty, Kat stepped forward, DNA envelope in hand, ready to ignite the chain reaction that would forever alter Fairmont Crest, her destiny, and the tangled, interwoven fates of everyone she had ever trusted or feared, because in this house, revelations were not merely personal, they were transformative, explosive, and inescapably, dangerously life-changing.